The bitter wind of the Wyoming Territory cut through the streets of Salvation Ridge like a knife, carrying with it whispers and accusations that had followed Samuel Cross for 3 long years. The old rancher pulled his worn coat tighter as he walked past the general store, feeling the weight of hostile stares from the townspeople who had once called him friend and neighbor. Samuel's weathered face bore the lines of a man who had seen too much sorrow, his grey hair thinning beneath a hat that had seen better decades. At 62 years old, he moved with the careful gait of someone whose body had been broken by years of hard labor and harder choices. The limp in his left leg served as a constant reminder of the war that had ended 15 years ago, but whose shadow still haunted every step he took. The cause of the town's hatred was simple enough to understand, though the truth behind it remained buried beneath layers of assumption and bitter memory. During the final months of the Civil War, Samuel Cross had served as a Union cavalry officer, leading raids against Confederate supply lines throughout the Western Territories. When his unit had been ordered to attack a Confederate stronghold near what would later become Salvation Ridge, Samuel had made a decision that would define the rest of his life. The Confederate position had been defended not by hardened soldiers, but by local militiamen, farmers and ranchers who were fighting to protect their homes and families. Among them had been nearly 24 men who would later settle in Salvation Ridge, including the fathers and brothers of people who now spat when Samuel's name was mentioned. What the townspeople believed, what they had been told by survivors of that battle, was that Captain Samuel Cross had led his Union forces in a devastating surprise attack that had killed 17 local defenders and wounded countless others. They believed he had shown no mercy to men who were simply trying to protect their community, and that his actions had been motivated by the cruel zealotry that characterized the worst Union officers. What they didn't know, what Samuel had never told anyone in the 15 years since the war's end, was that he had actually disobeyed his direct orders that day. His commanding general had instructed him to shell the Confederate position with artillery before launching the cavalry charge, a tactic that would have killed every defender and probably several civilian hostages as well. Instead, Samuel had chosen to attack with cavalry alone, hoping to capture the position with minimal bloodshed. The decision had cost him his military career and nearly his life. The Confederate defenders, forewarned by his refusal to use artillery, had been ready for the cavalry charge and had fought with the desperation of men protecting their families. Samuel's unit had taken heavy casualties, and he himself had been shot through the leg and left for dead when his horse fell during the retreat. By the time Samuel recovered from his wounds, the war was over, and his commanding officers were more interested in forgetting the failed operation than in acknowledging his attempt to minimize civilian casualties. The official report had described the battle as a successful cavalry engagement, making no mention of Samuel's deliberate choice to spare the Confederate artillery targets. Now, 15 years later, Samuel lived alone on a small ranch outside Salvation Ridge, raising cattle and trying to find some measure of peace in the solitude of the Wyoming plains. The townspeople tolerated his presence because he paid his bills promptly and kept to himself. But they made no secret of their contempt for the man they saw as a symbol of everything they had lost during the war. The hatred was particularly intense among the women of the town, especially those who had lost husbands or fathers in that long-ago battle. Chief among them was Martha Henderson, the town's most respected widow and the mother of 12-year-old Benjamin Henderson. Martha's husband, Captain James Henderson, had been the commanding officer of the Confederate militia and had died leading the defense of their position. Samuel had tried numerous times over the years to speak with Martha Henderson, to offer some explanation or apology for his role in her husband's death, but she had refused to acknowledge his existence. When forced to encounter him in business situations, she treated him with an icy politeness that was somehow more cutting than open. Hostility would have been the irony that tormented. Samuel Daly was that Martha Henderson's hatred was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what had actually happened during the battle. Captain James Henderson had died not because Samuel Cross was a merciless killer, but because Samuel's attempt to minimize casualties had given the Confederate defenders time to prepare for the attack. In trying to save lives, Samuel had inadvertently created the conditions that led to James Henderson's heroic last stand. The weight of this secret had grown heavier with each passing year, made worse by the knowledge that revealing the truth would require admitting that his humanitarian gesture had ultimately caused more suffering than following his original orders might have done. Samuel had learned to live with the town's hatred because he believed in the deepest part of his soul that he deserved it. Today, as Samuel walked through Salvation Ridge to conduct his weekly business, he noticed something different in the atmosphere. Instead of the usual cold indifference, there seemed to be an undercurrent of excitement and anticipation in the conversations he overheard. People were gathered in small groups, talking in low voices and occasionally glancing in his direction with expressions that seemed more curious than hostile. The mystery was solved when Samuel reached Peterson's general store and saw the notice posted on the bulletin board outside the front door. The territorial governor was organizing a ceremony to honor Civil War veterans from both sides of the conflict, and Samuel Cross's name appeared on the list of Union officers who would be recognized for their service. Samuel stared at the notice in horror, realizing that the ceremony would inevitably lead to questions about his wartime record and possibly expose the complicated truth about the battle that had defined his relationship with Salvation Ridge. The last thing he wanted was to become the center of attention in a community that already viewed him with suspicion and resentment. As he stood reading the notice, Samuel became aware of a presence beside him. He turned to see Martha Henderson studying the same announcement, her expression unreadable but her posture rigid with tension. "Mrs. Henderson," Samuel said quietly, tipping his hat with the careful courtesy he had maintained, despite years of cold treatment. Martha looked at him directly for the first time in months, her dark eyes holding depths of pain that Samuel recognized all too well. "Mr. Cross," she replied, her voice carefully controlled. "I see you're to be honored for your war service." The words carried no obvious sarcasm, but Samuel could hear the underlying bitterness that had poisoned every interaction between them. "I didn't ask for any recognition, ma'am. If it were up to me, the past would stay buried." Martha's expression shifted slightly, showing a flicker of something that might have been surprise. "Most soldiers are proud of their service, Mr. Cross. Don't you believe you deserve recognition for your accomplishments?" The question hit Samuel like a physical blow, carrying as it did the implication that he should be proud of causing the death of her husband and so many others. He struggled to find words that might bridge the gulf between them without revealing secrets that could only cause more pain. "I believe, Mrs. Henderson, that the war brought out both the best and the worst in all of us. I'm not proud of everything I did in service to my country, and I suspect that's true for most honest veterans." Martha studied his face carefully, as if searching for some sign of deception or manipulation. What she saw there seemed to surprise her, because her rigid posture softened slightly, and some of the ice left her voice. "Perhaps you're right, Mr. Cross. War certainly changed all of our lives in ways we never expected." The brief moment of connection was interrupted by the sound of running footsteps, and both adults turned to see young Benjamin Henderson racing down the street toward them, his face flushed with excitement and fear. "Mama!" the boy called out as he reached them. "There's trouble at the bank. Armed men rode into town, and Sheriff Morrison says everyone should stay inside." The peaceful afternoon in Salvation Ridge exploded into chaos as the sound of gunshots echoed from the direction of the First National Bank. Samuel Cross's military instincts, dormant for 15 years, instantly came alive as he assessed the situation with the practiced eye of a veteran cavalry officer. "How many men, son?" Samuel asked Benjamin Henderson, his voice carrying an authority that made the boy respond without thinking. 4 or 5, sir. They're wearing masks and carrying rifles. Sheriff Morrison tried to stop them, but they shot him in the shoulder and told everyone to stay back. Martha Henderson pulled her son closer, her face pale with fear as she realized the magnitude of the danger facing their small community. Salvation Ridge had been blessed with relative peace since its founding, and most of the townspeople had no experience dealing with armed criminals. Samuel's mind was already working through tactical possibilities as more gunshots rang out from the bank. The building sat at the center of Main Street, with clear lines of sight in all directions, making it nearly impossible to approach without being seen. The bandits had chosen their target well, and their timing suggested careful planning rather than impulsive desperation. "Mrs. Henderson," Samuel said urgently, "you need to get Benjamin inside somewhere safe. This isn't going to end quietly." Martha looked at him with confusion and growing fear. "What do you mean? Surely they'll just take the money and leave." Samuel shook his head grimly. "Bank robbers who shoot lawmen aren't planning to leave witnesses behind, ma'am. These men are here to kill anyone who can identify them." The harsh reality of Samuel's words was confirmed moments later when one of the masked gunmen emerged from the bank and fired several shots into the air, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly empty street. "Listen up, you sheep," the bandit shouted. "We know there's a back room in that bank where the real money is kept, and we know the banker's got the combination locked up in his head. We're gonna give him 10 minutes to remember it, and if he don't cooperate, we're gonna start shooting townspeople until he does." The threat sent a chill through everyone who heard it, transforming what might have been a simple robbery into a hostage crisis that could end in mass murder. Samuel could see people peering fearfully from windows and doorways, but he also knew that none of them had the training or equipment necessary to deal with professional killers. "We need to get word to the territorial marshal," Martha said desperately. "Someone has to ride for help." "The nearest marshal is 3 days away," Samuel replied, his tactical mind already working through the limited options available. "By the time help arrives, everyone in that bank will be dead." Benjamin Henderson looked up at Samuel with wide eyes that held more trust than fear. "Mr. Cross, you were a soldier. Can't you do something to help them?" The boy's question cut through 15 years of guilt and self-doubt like a blade, forcing Samuel to confront the choice that would define the rest of his life. He could walk away, as the townspeople expected him to do, and let others deal with the crisis. Or he could draw upon his military experience to try to save lives, knowing that doing so would expose him to dangers that could easily prove fatal. Martha Henderson seemed to read his thoughts, because her voice carried a note of desperation that pierced his heart. "Mr. Cross, I know we've had our differences, but there are innocent people in that bank. If you have any ideas about how to help them..." Samuel looked at the woman whose hatred had tormented him for years, seeing past her anger to the fear that any mother would feel when her community was under attack. In that moment, the old soldier made his decision. "I need you to gather anyone in town who knows how to shoot," Samuel told Martha. "Send them to the church, where they can see the bank but stay out of direct fire. Tell them to wait for my signal before they do anything." "What signal?" Martha asked. "They'll know it when they see it," Samuel replied grimly. "And Mrs. Henderson, make sure Benjamin stays with you, no matter what happens." Samuel quickly made his way to his horse, which was tied outside Peterson's store, and retrieved the Winchester rifle that he always carried when coming to town. The weapon was well maintained despite its age, and Samuel checked the action with the automatic precision of a man who had once depended on such tools for survival. As he prepared for what might be his final battle, Samuel's mind drifted back to the countless engagements he had fought during the war. The tactical situation was actually quite familiar. A fortified position held by desperate men, civilian hostages complicating any direct assault, and limited time before the situation deteriorated beyond recovery. The key difference was that 15 years ago, Samuel had commanded a full cavalry unit with supporting artillery. Today, he was essentially alone, with only a handful of untrained townspeople as potential backup. Samuel studied the bank building carefully, noting the positions of the windows and doors, the angles of approach that might provide some cover, and the likely escape routes the bandits would use if they decided to flee. The structure was typical of frontier construction, solid but not impregnable, with enough vulnerabilities to exploit if one knew what to look for. The plan that formed in Samuel's mind was desperate and dangerous, relying heavily on timing, misdirection, and the kind of calculated risk-taking that had made him a successful cavalry officer. More importantly, it was a plan that prioritized the safety of the hostages over everything else, including his own survival. As Samuel checked his weapons and prepared to move into position, he caught sight of Martha Henderson watching him from the doorway of the general store. For the first time in 3 years, her expression held something other than hatred or indifference. He couldn't quite identify what he saw in her eyes. But it wasn't contempt. "Mr. Cross," she called softly, her voice carrying across the empty street. Samuel turned toward her, surprised that she would risk exposing herself to speak with him. "Be careful," Martha said simply. The words hit Samuel harder than any bullet could have, carrying with them the first suggestion of human concern that Martha Henderson had shown him since his arrival in Salvation Ridge. For a moment, the old soldier felt something stir in his chest that he had thought was dead forever, the possibility of redemption. "Yes, ma'am," Samuel replied, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture of respect that encompassed far more than simple courtesy. As Samuel began his careful approach toward the bank, moving from cover to cover with the practiced skill of a veteran scout, he carried with him not just his weapons and his tactical plan, but also the fragile hope that he might finally find a way to atone for the sins of his past. The gunshots that had started this crisis continued to echo from inside the bank, each report serving as a reminder that time was running out for the innocent people trapped inside. Samuel Cross, the man the town had branded a traitor, was about to discover whether 15 years of guilt and isolation had destroyed his capacity for heroism, or whether the soldier he had once been still lived somewhere deep inside his wounded soul. The battle is about to begin. Will Samuel's military experience be enough to save the hostages? Subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell to see how this incredible showdown unfolds. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Main Street as Samuel Cross positioned himself behind the water trough outside Brennan's hardware store, his Winchester rifle steady in hands that remembered the weight of command despite 15 years of peaceful ranching. Through the bank's front window, he could see the silhouettes of the masked gunmen moving among what appeared to be at least 6 hostages, including banker Thomas Morrison and several townspeople who had been unlucky enough to be conducting business when the robbery began. Samuel's tactical assessment was grim, but not hopeless. The bandits had made the classic mistake of assuming their hostages would provide complete protection, failing to account for the angles of fire available from the surrounding buildings. More critically, they had underestimated the determination of a man who had spent 3 years carrying the weight of an entire town's hatred and was finally being offered a chance at redemption. The plan Samuel had formulated was built around creating multiple diversions that would force the bandits to divide their attention, giving him opportunities to eliminate them one by one without endangering the hostages. It was the kind of complex tactical maneuver that would have been challenging even with a full military unit. Attempting it alone was either brilliantly audacious or suicidally foolish. Samuel's first move was to circle wide around the bank, using the alleyways and backlots to reach a position behind the building where he could observe the rear entrance. As he had suspected, one of the bandits was stationed there as a lookout, smoking a cigarette and clearly bored with sentry duty. The man never saw Samuel coming. The old rancher's approach was as silent as smoke, utilizing skills learned during countless night raids against Confederate positions. A single blow with the rifle butt rendered the sentry unconscious, and Samuel quickly bound and gagged him with strips torn from his own shirt. One down, 3 or 4 to go. Samuel's next objective was to reach the roof of the adjacent building, which would give him a clear view into the bank's main room through the skylight that provided natural illumination during business hours. The climb was more challenging than it would have been 15 years earlier, but Samuel's ranching life had kept him reasonably fit despite his advancing age. From his elevated position, Samuel could see the full scope of the situation inside the bank. 4 bandits remained active, with their apparent leader holding a gun to Banker Morrison's head, while demanding access to the safe. The other 3 were positioned to watch the front entrance, the side windows, and the hostages who sat huddled together near the teller cages. What caught Samuel's attention, however, was a 5th figure that made his blood run cold. 12-year-old Benjamin Henderson sat among the hostages, his young face pale with fear, but his posture showing the kind of quiet courage that reminded Samuel powerfully of the boy's father. The child's presence changed everything. Samuel's original plan had involved creating enough chaos to confuse the bandits while he picked them off from various positions. But such tactics would put Benjamin at unacceptable risk. Instead, he would need to attempt something far more dangerous. A direct assault that would draw all the gunfire toward himself and away from the innocent people trapped inside. Samuel checked his pocket watch and noted that nearly an hour had passed since the robbery began. The bandits were growing increasingly agitated, and their leaders' threats against the hostages were becoming more specific and violent. Time was running out, and Samuel knew that he would have to act soon, regardless of the personal cost. The old rancher's hands were steady as he took aim through the skylight, but his mind was filled with memories of another time when split-second decisions had meant the difference between life and death for the people depending on him. 15 years ago, his attempt to minimize casualties had led to unintended tragedy. Today, he was determined not to make the same mistake twice. Samuel's first shot shattered the skylight and took down the bandit leader with surgical precision, the bullet striking him in the shoulder and spinning him away from Banker Morrison. The sudden attack from above caught the remaining bandits completely off guard, giving Samuel precious seconds to reposition himself for the next phase of his assault. Rather than remaining on the roof where he would have been trapped if the bandits organized a coordinated response, Samuel dropped through the broken skylight into the bank's main room, landing hard but maintaining his grip on his rifle. The move was tactically sound but physically devastating. Samuel felt something give way in his injured leg as he hit the floor, sending waves of pain through his entire body. The remaining 3 bandits recovered from their surprise quickly, turning their weapons towards Samuel with deadly intent. But the old cavalry officer had not forgotten the lessons learned in dozens of similar firefights, and his movements carried the fluid grace of a man who had faced death so many times that it held no particular terror for him. Samuel's second and third shots eliminated 2 more bandits before they could draw a proper bead on him, but the 4th gunman managed to find cover behind the heavy oak desk that dominated the center of the room. The bandits' return fire forced Samuel to dive behind the teller cage, bullets splintering the wood inches from his head. It was then that disaster struck. The surviving bandit, desperate and cornered, grabbed young Benjamin Henderson and pressed his revolver against the boy's temple. "Drop your gun, old man!" the bandit screamed. "Drop it or I'll blow this kid's brains out." Samuel found himself facing the nightmare scenario that every soldier dreaded. A situation where any action could result in the death of an innocent person. Through the wooden bars of the teller cage, he could see Benjamin's frightened but determined face, and beyond the boy, Martha Henderson's anguished expression as she watched through the front window. "Please," Samuel said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "The boy's done nothing wrong. Let him go, and you can walk out of here alive." The bandit's laugh was harsh and desperate. "Walk out to what? A rope?" "I don't think so, old man. You're going to drop that rifle and kick it over here, or this kid dies right now." Samuel knew with absolute certainty that the bandit was lying. Men who had already committed murder rarely showed mercy to witnesses, regardless of their age. If Samuel surrendered his weapon, both he and Benjamin would die, along with the other hostages who could identify the surviving robber. There was only one option remaining, and it was one that would almost certainly cost Samuel his life. The old rancher stood up slowly, his rifle held at the ready, but not directly aimed at the bandit. "All right," he said calmly. "You win. I'm putting down my weapon." Samuel began to lower his rifle, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. The bandit relaxed slightly, loosening his grip on Benjamin just enough to create the opportunity Samuel had been waiting for. In one fluid motion that drew upon every skill he had learned during his military career, Samuel spun toward the bandit while pushing Benjamin away from the line of fire. The maneuver placed Samuel directly between the gunman and the boy, sacrificing his own protection to shield the child from harm. The bandit's shot took Samuel high in the chest, spinning him around and driving him to his knees. But even as he fell, the old cavalry officer's final shot found its mark, ending the threat to Benjamin Henderson and the other hostages. Samuel Cross collapsed onto the bank's wooden floor, his vision beginning to blur as blood spread across his shirt. Through the growing haze, he could see townspeople rushing into the building, Martha Henderson racing toward her son, and Benjamin himself, kneeling beside the man who had saved his life. "Mr. Cross," the boy whispered, tears streaming down his young face. "Why did you do it? Why did you save me?" Samuel's voice was weak but clear as he looked up into Benjamin's eyes. Because that's what your father would have done, son. Good men protect the innocent no matter what it costs them." Martha Henderson appeared beside her son, her own eyes filled with tears as she looked down at the man she had hated for 3 years. "Samuel," she whispered, using his first name for the first time since they had met. "I'm so sorry. I never understood." "You had every right to hate me," Samuel replied, his strength fading with each word. "Your husband was a good man who died because of my choices. I've carried that guilt every day since the war ended." "No," Martha said firmly, taking Samuel's hand in hers. "James died because he was defending what he believed in, just like you were. The war made enemies of good men who should have been friends." As the crowd gathered around Samuel Cross, the townspeople of Salvation Ridge began to see him not as the traitor they had believed him to be, but as the hero he had always been. The man who had taken a bullet to save a child had proven that true courage wasn't defined by which uniform a man wore, but by his willingness to sacrifice everything for others. Samuel's last conscious thought was of Martha Henderson's hand in his, offering the forgiveness he had sought for so many years. In saving Benjamin Henderson's life, Samuel Cross had finally found the redemption that had eluded him since the war's end. The traitor had become a hero, and his sacrifice would be remembered in Salvation Ridge long after the pain of old conflicts had faded into history. What a heroic sacrifice! Samuel Cross proved that true courage knows no uniform or past mistakes. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell for more incredible tales of redemption and heroism in the Old West. Share this powerful story with everyone who believes in second chances and the power of doing what's right. What moment moved you the most in Samuel's journey? Tell us in the comments below.